Good evening and welcome to this edition of DeFacto Review with Gerald DeFacto and myself, Aruna, bringing you a weekly edition of news and current affairs that shape Mongolia. We are live on Facebook at VTelevision. You can also follow us on Twitter, #GeraldDeFacto. Coming up on the program: Amendment to Law on State General Registration. Amendments in the scope of banking law. Mongolia and Russia initiatives. Searching for the rule of law. In Mongolian public service, approximately 70% of work is related to registrations of identity, property, and companies. Today, many registration processes are bogged down due to lack of digital infrastructure and discrepancies in software used by various authorities. Last week, the Parliament discussed a new amendment to the law of state registration. One of the more crucial discussions was about the unification of registrations of land and other properties. Could you please elaborate on this amendment and what is the potential of this amendment on the economy, please?
This amendments or this new law is very crucial, has very crucial importance for Mongolia. It is probably as crucially important as the constitutions. Why? Because it has to do with the main functions, main purpose of the state. The main key roles of the states are protecting three things. One, it's people's security, human rights, and property, protection of property. In order to protect these three values, you need to know at least everything about those subjects. And that's why the registrations are important. And if you don't know what to protect, then you cannot protect it. So that's why this protection, this registration of these properties, ID about person, organizations, and properties are key for Mongolian development. In fact, because of the problems with these registrations, we have problems in the society like productivity issue, we stay very long in a traffic jam, just to make a reference that you are you, okay, or you are husband of that person. So all this takes so much time. And overall it impacts on the way we use our time, and it also helps to combat corruptions, because now after proper registration of all properties, then there is nothing to lose, or they cannot misuse properties belong to somebody. And speaking about to somebody, there are four types of properties: private property, private goods, public goods, club goods, and common resources. We don't have clear differences in between these four types of property, and hopefully with this law it will be clear.
Will this amendment disperse the shadow economy on corrupt practices of registering property and companies?
Yes, it will, because registration will be faster. In particular, transfer of property from whom to whom, it will be clear. And also with this sort of registration, if we use properly current RTC achievements in artificial intelligence, then we can have even register contracts, for example, which is also a substantial part of the business. Mm-hmm. So now with the business, we have a property registered, we know who belongs to, now contracts, etc. But I think it is a bit next stage of this law. Mm-hmm. But however, for example, the most important thing here is we will have first time registration of state-owned properties, because they were not registering state-owned properties in hospital number 3 in fence of hospital number 3, there are some 30 or so buildings built, private buildings, so that even car has no access, ambulance has no access to the hospital number 3. Why? Because when they register just building, not the building and around the spaces. And it is the subject of corruption, the people use it. By the same token, we can say about the 4 buildings built up one to another, facing windows facing each other, four buildings on the west side of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So now finally we will get state-owned properties registered, which is key issue for combating corruption. Another thing I want to tell is
are there...
I mean, property and land have been always separate in Mongolia. Registered separately by 2 other organizations. That's why when you come to the building one issue, land another issue. They are issuing land to 2 persons, for example. Or part of the land is already part of the put together, and now individual people are fighting because the registration is not clear. That's why new law suggesting to have one database for, we call it cadastre, service of land, now property and land, all is to be registered in one place. This is the key, the heart of this law. Now, remember, this law is now being discussed at the parliament. It will be further discussions. But however, as a democratic society, we should discuss law while it is in the process of discussions, right? That's what's happening with this law.
What other benefits for daily lives of citizens are there with this amendment?
Say a person who has registered in South Gobi Aymak, a student now studying in Ulaanbaatar, suddenly she or he lost ID. Now for reissuing that ID, that person is to go back to South Gobi Aymak, register, prove that she is she, the certain documents that where she was born, who is father, who is mother. But these are the documents which it's already known to the state, any state agency. And why the state is asking the information, they know and they have it. So it is one of the reasons why so many bureaucrats we have. And you go to one place 2, 3 times. So that's why. Another thing with registrations coming of all properties. For example, it is state-owned properties or public properties are so bad registered in Mongolia that, for example, all the mayor offices of all time, they were misusing our public land. They have sold Zaysan Mountain Valley, Zaysan Valley, Yarmak Valley, and the Archit Valley, Nukht Valley. And who is misusing it? All bureaucrats who are taking money under the table because this is not properly registered. So we hope it is avoided. Even, you know, Sukhpata Square, part of Sukhpata Square is already sold to the private company, and nobody knows who to, we know to whom, but actually property is good in private hand. But to which private hand it was given should be public procedure, which unfortunately did not happen. The other thing is this citizen ID has a small chip, yellow chip of this size, and it is empty now. And originally they were saying that, oh, this will have every information about you, everybody will be read to scan it and they will know everything, which is not happening for last at least 10 years. Why? Because the government is not stable. They always keep changing. As a result, this one is not filled with any information. That's unfortunately very not good. And the other thing is there is 2 types of information, open and closed information. Closed information of the importance of state secrecy, whatever. That part is closed. The rest is open. That's the law is now specifying which is open. For example, the land, the building, the property building, the citizens, if they want to know to whom this building belongs, then the state is must give information upon the request. Why? Because it will be regarded as a public information. And all these things were not made on the purpose by people who used to live with corruption. So in order to stop the corruption, we should have this registration, general registration in the law approved as soon as possible.
I see. Let's move on to the next topic of this evening. Last week, the Mongol Bank Governor, Mr. Bayrzakhan, reported to the Parliament. Since 2017, the central bank has been updating the major laws in the banking sector. One of the changes introduced pertains to government support of commercial banks through recapitalization in order to prevent them from bankruptcy. The Mongol Bank believes that this will protect customer savings. What do you think about this proposal?
This proposal says that Mongolian economy is still in a crisis and Mongolian banking sector is still sick. And in order to treat the sick patient, they want to use very peaceful way. Why? Because IMF conditions for this bailout was to have made independent assets review of commercial banks, and which was made last year by the Czech Republic PwC, Czech-based PwC. Mongol Bank governor said early this year that everything is fine. No, there's no the major things to worry about, but there is something to worry about, which I repealed now only. 523 billion Turks worth assets have been regarded as bad assets. It will never come back in all the commercial banks. But the Mongol Bank governor was too general, probably on the purpose, because not every bank has this problem. But instead of naming particular banks, he said the whole total banks, we have 15 banks, they need 523 billion value injected into the bank. Okay, so but this sort of money, by the end of this year, if you don't put it into your bank, then the state want to come to take the stake. They want to put this amount of money, I mean, accordingly to the particular bank, and take certain shares. So in order to have this operation smoothly, they are doing these amendments now, so that in 6 months there will not be in surprise the banks. It's good and bad.
All economists usually advise against government subsidies of commercial banks. Wouldn't this amendment mean that the government will subsidize commercial banks?
Well, it has two sides. One is why the banks who made the wrong decisions in the issued bad loan, or the bad loan they can secure, why they should not be bankrupt. If they cannot be able, they should be bankrupt on one side. On the other side, as you said, the customer savings will disappear with this bankruptcy.
Yes.
That's why the state is, I mean, it was happening in Korea 1987, 97, and 2010 in other countries, recently in Europe. The bad banks are, because they have so big commercial customer space, that if they are allowed to have bankruptcy, the whole state system has a bankruptcy. So that's on the other side. But in Mongolia, 2-3 out of 4 commercial banks is 80% of all total bank assets.
Wow.
And out of this 3 out of 4, 3 owned by 1 or 2 persons through different structure of their companies, their own companies, but it's actually under 1 or 2 persons. Those banking needs causes more attention now, because those companies should have a more public disclosure of their assets quality. So with the bank state coming to this bank, they should allow more access to public about their actual situation.
Do you think Mongolia is at risk of seeing a group of commercial banks going bankrupt again, like it did 10 years ago, for example?
We don't know which bank it has the more problem. It is not disclosed information. However, as I said, during the economic or banking crises, some banks are saved in this way. So even if some have a big problem, looks like the state will go into the bank, and the Mongol bank will take over the power of this commercial bank. But because we have some experiences, like ZOS Bank made IPO and bankrupt, Anod Bank made IPO and bankrupt, state took and saved, restructured the banks.
Yeah.
As you said, customer savings were saved, but shareholders who bought the shares are not saved up to now. Potentially they have still the claim to have their assets back that they bought the share because the state could not control. Through management irregularities in these two banks. And now State Bank is consisting of this ZOS Bank, Anod Bank, and Saving Bank of 3 banks, and owned 75% by the Saving Insurance Corporation, 25% of by Minister of Finance. Both have no right to own commercial banks. Still they own, they promise of privatizing, they are not doing that. So in case now at the end of this year, the commercial banks still need to increase their assets. If they cannot, if the state is buying out these banks with our money, they should have a law, for example, within 3 years, this bank will be a public-owned company, and the state will take off from this IPO money back to the money from the taxes, from our taxes to put into the bank. So this sort of additional provisions probably we need in this new law of bank recapitalization.
I see. Thank you. Let's discuss the third topic of this evening about the Mongolia-Russia initiatives. Is Mongolia really leaving behind its third neighbor policy, is the question at hand. In 2017, the heads of state of Mongolia and Russia, Mr. Batalla and Mr. Putin, signed a bilateral agreement on a new strategy for a partnership. As a follow-up to this agreement, Mongolia launched a Mongolia-Russia initiative 2018 last week in Ulaanbaatar. In the scope of these initiatives, both ministers of transport signed an agreement in which Russia would provide 56% discount on fees on container transport and 66% discount on fees on coal transportation on railways through Russian territory. Could you please tell us more about these initiatives and what is really going on between the two countries?
Last year in September, Mongolian president, newly elected president, visited Vladivostok, met Mr. Putin, agreed to, as you said, to more extend our relations, which is happening this year. For example, we had not recently this sort of delegation, culture delegation, the best ballet dancing group of Russia, Moiseyev ballet group was in Mongolia. 3-4 ministers of Russia at the same time in Mongolia had a large business delegation and group discussions, etc., which we welcome because we need more dialogue, more cooperation with our neighbors, of course. Plus we can avoid anyway. So we need to work together. It's good development. As far as this coal and tariff, transport on railways tariff are concerned, Russia last year promised to give comparable tariff for the transport of coal, say, from Mongolia to the north, around Mongolia to the Vladivostok, Nahodka, to be the same almost rate as to the China, which is 2 times closer. Ulaanbaatar, Tianjin is Ulaanbaatar, Vladivostok, all the completely different distances we see on the map. And that's why what they have agreed, they have now signed, okay? That's what, concerning that's one of the things going on in Mongolia towards Russia, and I hope Russia and Mongolia will have more businesses, more economic operations that will impact the way our people live, in particular in Mongolia, because we have a trade relations with a very big trade deficit with Russia, because 95% of our trade turnover, export, import together, 95% is consisting of fuel imports, and only 5% of consisting of small goods, some socks, some few meat that individuals take, because commercially to bring this sort of goods to Russia has a huge customs barrier, 60 to 70% of tariff that Russia collects from our export to Russia. And every time we talk about that, well, actually, with Russia we talk a lot, but things move very slow.
Minister of Road and Transport, Mr. Batyrtyn, announced that Mongolia will now be able to export coal to Europe. What does he mean by that?
Well, this is one of the dream list, I hope, because first of all, this coal to have such a value after this 5,000–6,000 kilometers transport, even with the lower tariff, to be competitive on the European market, it should be very high quality. Our coal has high quality, yes, but it is not to be a raw coal. It is to be a washed, it is enriched, they say. It's a particular type of coal after processing. And hopefully it will be economically viable, feasible for European companies to buy from Mongolia within the framework they have agreed on the Paris Agreement. Because now you see in Europe they will use less and less coal, more and more renewable energy. So on that market, one day if we decided to sell and if one business decided to buy, we have agreement. That's good news.
Are any of the initiatives in this new partnership with Russia related to recent discussions on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
We tend to believe so, because suddenly a month ago almost, our president had made a speech, surprise speech, in which he said that Mongolia is, whatever we talk, whatever we try, we cannot have success because we are under geopolitical pressure, and we need to be more integrated into our cooperation of our two neighbors, meaning Shanghai Organizations of Cooperation. It could have probably certain sense on that, but many mega projects and many things that don't go in Mongolia are not because we are not member of that organization. It is because we have a corruption, we have a relatively
close relation with...
Yep. So,
yes. Well,
so that's why we should domestically to bring our order in house, and of course to have a good relations, dynamic relations to our neighbors.
Yes.
But how much they want to do so the same, it is still we are waiting for.
Yes, and of course it's important not to leave out our third neighbor policy in discussions with Russia and China with regard to...
No, I don't think, you see, the third neighbor policy is such a thing that should not be decreased or of less importance because we have good relations to our neighbors. We should go to our neighbors and with our third neighbor policy in spite of whatever happening in the world, because this is our commitment. We cannot not to do what we have agreed with our third neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Last topic of the evening is the rule of law, or is Mongolian judiciary system in crisis? In 2015, the current president, Mr. Batulga, who was former member of parliament, and also Mr. Kansu, who was former Minister of Transport, were investigated by authorities on two cases. One was in relation to the construction of the Sanshant industrial park. The other was the construction of 260-kilometer long railway that was to connect the Tavantalga coal mine to the southern border with China. About $12 million were borrowed from the state budget, 11 million of which are allegedly stolen. They were supposed to be spent on feasibility studies. So this is being investigated, but last week several individuals related to this case were dismissed by Capital City District Court, and the question now is, what is the real reason behind dismissing the criminal cases related to this issue?
Very logical questions, and I want to answer altogether one question. The question is, if citizen Batulga was not elected into the president of Mongolia, will these cases will be dismissed? Mm-hmm. So let's try to answer these questions together. So I want to answer these questions by questions.
How about the former prime ministers, Mr. Bayer and Sakhanbilik? They were also released from prison on bail last week for reasons of health. What do you think about that?
Again, I have this question raises another questions for me. It is, will these two ex-prime ministers will be released on bail if they were not sick? Second questions. There are other two persons, Mr. Bayırtsok, Mr. Biampasakhan.
There's also a third, Mr. Arunsam.
Arunsam, yes. These three people, will they be released on bail if they will get sick? Mm-hmm. Third questions. These people were investigated at extended period in the prison under the reason that they may misuse the ex-power they had occupied, again, which somehow cause more questions than answer. So if it is the case, will they do it can they do it from home? Mm-hmm. Okay. So at the end, the question mark is staying in the society why these people were arrested. Mm-hmm. What are the reasons? Why they would not show the reason up to now?
And lastly, the Mongolian Copper Corporation issued a statement in which it said that the Irten Corporation restructuring means that that the court decisions are being disregarded. So this raises the question, why is the government ignoring its court decisions?
Very logical statement they made, because the law, the district law have said that it was illegal to seize 49% by the state directly, which sounds logical. Mm-hmm. And because this decision was made by the government, not by the court. Mm-hmm. So all this together shows that it's still the law. Not everybody is, including the government, is under the rule of law.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for your insight. That's all for this edition of This Week.
Thank you very much. Good night.